Goal setting allows us to find focus. It allows us to find the thing that we're going to give ourselves to. And if you're going to give yourself to something, there comes a point at which that only works if it comes from an intrinsic place, an internal, something that you can offer, something you're going after.
Welcome back to the Hard But Worth It podcast. We're glad that you're joining us today. Just want to remind you that if you're following us, you're liking what you're hearing, please like these videos, share them as they come across your feed, and maybe help us kind of expand our network by sharing the love. But we appreciate you joining in. Kirk, today we're going to talk about goals.
Woohoo!
And it's a big trigger word. And it's also, there's nothing really fancy or creative. I mean, we're kind of capturing the seasonal trend of looking into a new year. Yeah. This tends to be the time where we all get reflective, centered, and we're looking out into the future. And often we're painting that picture of a desired, preferred future. And I think with that, we were talking and we just wanted to create some space to hold that, because one of the things that we do different at Icon Coaching is we don't just talk about goals. I mean, all goals may be important at different times, but we really focus around this idea of intrinsic motivation. So our whole focus around coaching is getting into that deeper intrinsic motivation, knowing that there are still extrinsic motivators that drive us and we have to participate with socially in this world. And so there may be goals that show up related to our work, from our bosses.
They can be fine.
They can be fine. But today we're going to kind of talk about how do we look at goals from the intrinsic point of view, and then maybe some of the process in learning to see those, size them up. And, we're going to talk a little bit today, but we might have another 2 or 3 episodes that we kind of pull on around this goal setting. But it really ties into the what do you want question in our framework.
Question number 2, what do you want? The second hardest question in the world.
That's right, because we don't know what the first one is. Is that right?
No, we do. We're just not ready for it yet. We're
That's
waiting.
Right.
You gotta get behind the third paywall to get to that one.
But, we started question 1, which is where are you or where am I? It's the is, locating reality. Great. But now this is that time where we're looking at where do I want to go? Where am I headed? And we would say, where are you going in the human experience is really a what do you want question. And then want is a subjective kind of mysterious word, because I can want what I really want, or I could want what I think I should want. So there's this should at play.
And what I've been told to want gets really powerful.
Exactly.
And then I need to align with what you want because you're my boss. So I want what you want. And it's complex.
So just kind of kick us off a little bit around this idea of intrinsic goal setting.
Yeah. So the first thing, for me, the first thing that we have to sort of lay out is that this notion of intrinsic motivation is much newer than we actually think. It's in we think of it as identity sometimes, or something that comes from inside of me that I want. I don't want to work for the man and all that kind of stuff. And it's very present in our world, but the actual idea is a few decades old in the literature and in psychology and things like that. And so I would suggest that we're not very good at it yet. And I think it's good to know that. Like, this is new for us. And if you think about human history, and let's do a quick history lesson, back for almost all of time, there's only been 2 modes of leadership in the world. And this comes out of work by Douglas McGregor, who wrote a book called Theory X and Theory Y in the 60s. He presents this idea of human motivation in this very different light. He presents it as, he literally says, in that book, he says, in all of human history, there's only been these 2 modes of leadership, force and authority. He says there's a third one emerging, but we really don't know what it is yet. And he wrote that in the 60s, and he was an eminent psychologist teaching at MIT. This is one of the smartest guys on the subject, and he's like, we're working on this, but it's new, because it was. I would say it's now identity is probably this other mode, leading from who you are and what you're all about. I learned today in another podcast I was listening to with someone who was a colleague of McGregor, that when he wrote this and he put it out into the public world, they actually got death threats, bomb threats. This idea that the nature of work had changed and that there's this new mode and that people want to actually work, that there's an inherent satisfaction that can come from work, was so revolutionary in the mid-60s that their office got bomb threats over it.
Wow.
Edward Deasy, who we quote a lot, was actually fired from a business department for making similar claims in the early 70s. So it's a new idea. We're not very good at it yet, although we're getting much better all the time. And it has threatened the status quo. So it's kind of a big idea.
Sure.
And it works something like this. If force and authority were the only modes of leadership in the past, then if you were like authority, okay, so Pharaoh was Pharaoh because Pharaoh was actually God. And that's super convenient. If you want authority, being God is probably the best source, at least in that area.
Exactly.
Well, then we get rid of that and we go, okay, we don't do that anymore, so we go to monarchies. So now if you want to be the political leader of the region, of your kingdom, you get ordained by God, appointed by God, anointed by God. So God's still in the picture. But now we've got this, the priest has to come and put the crown on your head and do the, Onamos Padres, Diamos Diegos thing. And then all of a sudden you're the king. And
with the nice orchestra music in the back, right, from the mission playing.
It's always the case.
Epic.
But the authority is still from God, which pretty powerful place. So now you have the authority to be the ruler. In the democratic system, we changed everything, right? We're like, nope, that's wrong. We don't want to do that anymore. So we open up with the line that says all humans are created, well, not all. We know it wasn't all, but men are created equal and given inalienable rights by God, who then they get to pick their ruler.
Yeah.
So it's still this authority chain that comes from this divine place. So if you have that kind of authority and you have a big army, force.
So the badge and the gun.
Totally.
Yeah.
You can get kind of anything done. You can rule the land. If your army is bigger and you have more authority than the guy next door, you can rule his land too, and you can build an empire. And that's how we got everything done. In that world, external motivation was kind of the game. It's all we knew. They fit together. What McGregor and Deasy and Maslow and Drucker and those guys were writing about was there's something going on in our world where the nature of work is changing. And those modes of leadership are no longer enough. That there's this new thing emerging because we had to start understanding that humans, because the nature of work was changing, humans' motivation was changing, and it wasn't changing like into something new. There was something that had always been there that was emerging.
Right.
And it mattered in how value got created. And they started to write about this new thing that was coming on board. I think it's largely being captured best right now in the word intrinsic motivation, or a sense of identity that comes from inside of us. And so now we have this new thing he's writing about. And Deasy writes about it in the 70s, on and on and on. And yet, for all of our parents, grandparents, back as far as you want to go, really didn't live in a world where this was dominant or even available.
Yeah.
And so humans primarily learn through mimicry, and we watch those that came before, and then we've experienced them as our leaders. And what we've primarily experienced is force and authority and external motivation as the primary experience in getting work done. And so when we come to the question of goal setting, there's this inherent that doesn't fit my paradigm because, and this is the key, I only understand goals relative to external motivation. And Deasy makes the important point that external motivation, which is punishment and reward systems. So what that says is, I want something done, and I have the authority and the gun, I have the badge and the gun, and I want to get that done, and I need you to do it. So I'm going to use punishment or rewards to get you to do what I want done. And that was a functional definition of leadership for a long, long time.
Yeah.
The problem is, Deasy makes the point that is always an attempt at controlling people. You're trying to control their behavior to get done what you want done. And we don't want to feel that way anymore. We're very attuned to that today. And so whenever the goal word comes up, I think it largely lands in our consciousness in that historic sense. And I don't want that.
Yeah.
I don't want to be told what to do and what my goals are. I don't believe you when you say that you want to empower me. I think you want to control me.
Yeah.
Right? And we might not say that, but there's this inherent goals.
Yeah.
And that's part of it. Now there's more to it. There's another side to why we kind of pull back from it, which we'll get to in a minute. But to set a goal that comes from an intrinsic motivated place, something inside of you, and where intrinsic motivation is something like where the doing of the thing is its own reward, right? That is a goal that is very much in line with what I think our current workforce is trying to accomplish. But I think we just sort of retract from this goal setting idea. And so to start right off the bat, I want to say that when we say the word goal, we recognize that there are goals that still remain external motivation.
They're not going away.
They actually work.
Yeah.
They're appropriate in many circumstances. But there's this whole other body of work, this whole other practice of goal setting, and we treat it fundamentally differently. We just use the same word.
What I tell clients to that point is it's like when we get to the what do you want question, it's when you begin to evaluate your approach and movement in life and you realize that most or all of your desired destinations, your goals, are set towards the area of should, then eventually that is more punishment than sacrifice, because it does get hard along the way.
Right.
And while it may early on show up as compliance in you, I'm willing to do this because I have to do it, but it's obligation still. What we know is at some point that pain leads to defiance. Right. It's just an elevated form of, compliance, but it's still this sense of it's costing me a level of punishment where eventually I either bail, I burn out, I crash. So it's not that it goes away, but we have to make sure at least some of what we're putting our energy towards represents things deeply intrinsic to me rather than me just doing external or extrinsic motivator. So I kind of have that conversation where it's a mixture of both. We just want to make sure most or all isn't directed down to the should, because that leads you to, I think, just a level of suffering that's not worth it.
It's not worth it. It's in the word itself, punishment.
Yeah.
It becomes punishment. The difference between punishment and sacrifice, and we've said this 100 times so far, but I'll say it again. The difference between punishment and sacrifice is not the elimination of that which is hard, right? It's the acceptance of hard and framing it from punishment to sacrifice because of intrinsic motivation.
Right.
That's the only difference. There are so many things that you are willing to do and doing that I just don't want to.
Exactly.
And I'm not going to do that work.
Yeah.
It's not worth it to me. But I'm doing hard things all the time that people won't do. They look at my schedule or they look at my choices. I'm like, why are you doing that? That's crazy. And I'm like,
so we have a listener listening right now going, okay, great. This works. I get it. But I don't have the luxury.
Right.
Like I'm so busy. I'm buried, whether it's at home, I'm buried in my job. I've got all these demands, extrinsic motivators and drivers. So great. That's awesome. But really it's not realistic. Right. How do you?
So that person might be, they might actually be right to start with. You might look at that situation there and go, yeah, I get that.
Yeah.
So we need to build a world, build a foundation for you where you can get to this place where you can break up with have to and start having more and more of the get to in your life. And that happens at a level of income, at a level of success that is much lower than most people think.
Right.
It's very attainable, but you have to do some building. You have to do some work to get there. There is a certain amount of necessity of surviving. What baffles me, not baffles, that's the wrong word for it. I'm not baffled by this anymore. Mm-hmm. What I wish we could all understand better is how far away from the need to survive we're actually living. Like survival for most of us is somewhat built into the system now. Now I know that's not true for everybody. I know that. But for many, many people, you're like surviving is done. Yeah. You can tick that off the box. I literally have people who are in good careers, making good income, that have 2 little kids that just came into their life for the last 3 or 4 years. And it's scary. It's it's a lot of responsibility. Right. And they start to revert to this, but I've got to put food on the table. And I'm like, dude, wrong metaphor. I'm pretty sure there's always going to be food on your table.
Yeah.
It might not always be ribeyes or whatever this, you might not be drinking the best wine you want to, but the idea that you have to put food on the table, I think that's kind of done for you, and yet they're still trying to just survive.
Right.
So that's number one. It may be true that you're not there yet, but for most of us, we can get there faster than we think. Second part is most of us are crushed by a to-do list, by all the things we have to get done. but we haven't evaluated if it's the right to-do list. And when it comes to goal setting, a lot of times people are like, I don't have room for one more thing in my life. And I'm like, well, how do you know all the things in your life
that's really good.
are the right things in your life if you don't have goals? One of the things that quality goal setting does is it allows us to say powerful yeses and nos to all kinds of things. Right. And I would suggest that for every yes, it's 1,000 nos. You don't even notice them after a while, but in the beginning, it can feel that way.
Yeah, I say the same thing too. It's like when we know what our yeses are, then our nos become really clear.
Yes.
But when we're trying to just understand what we're going to say no to without knowing what our yeses are, that becomes an impossible task because there are 1,000 no's.
That's right.
To every one yes. So do the easy work. It's hard. Maybe it's not the easy work, but the simpler work of find your yeses, the few that you're going to give your life to, you're going to give the best to. Yeah. Then it's easy to say no or not now even to that.
Right.
Yeah.
And people say, let your yes be yes and your no be no. And I'm like, no. The punctuation matters. Right. You can say no period and no comma or no exclamation point, right? That's the hell no.
Exactly.
Right? But your yes should only be yes period.
Yeah.
Right. But what we do is we say yes comma. And what I mean by that is yes, as long as I have time. Yes, as long as there's energy. Right. Yes, as long as something better doesn't come along. That's not good. But we can totally say, I can't do that, comma, unless I have time. Or unless something changes, that kind of a thing.
Yeah.
But it's the no that you got to learn. And goal setting allows us to find focus. It allows us to find the thing that we're going to give ourselves to. And if you're going to give yourself to something, there comes a point at which that only works if it comes from an intrinsic place, an internal, something that you can offer, something you're going after. And saying these kinds of yeses, the hard part about it is it's vulnerable to do so. It's exposing and revealing. And then we were talking beforehand about, and then when you say what your yes is, then you can be held accountable to it.
I know.
Or you have to hold yourself accountable.
Yeah. So we'll dig into that in another episode because that just takes us down a whole nother interesting and important conversation. But give us a baby step. So like Dave Ramsey talks about these baby steps, because you can look into this and be overwhelmed. Right. So someone's sitting here and they're going, okay, I'm going to give this a try. Intrinsic goal in 2024. I've got all my things, but I'm going to try this for new. What's a way to practice this for some of our listeners?
So one of the things that this boils down to, well, first of all, you have to wrestle with yourself a bit.
Yeah.
You have to hear yourself, right? You have to go through the process of journaling or writing and then talking.
Yeah.
I've written really well designed goals, shared them with someone and knew instantly that it wasn't what I wanted.
Yeah.
It was what I should want. It was what I think they wanted me to want. But it's this iterative act. You don't just sit down and write goals. When I sit down to write goals, it takes me time, months sometimes, to figure out what they are. That's number one. Number two, the notion inside of it is people talk about they want it, to be something they're passionate about or something that brings life. And that's right, but you can't get rid of the hard. Passion actually means the thing you're willing to suffer for.
Yeah.
Right? That's what passion means. So we often say, what hill are you willing to die on? And not to put too high a stakes on this, I think it's more like, what hill are you going to die on?
Right.
It's that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So the question here is something like, what are you willing to sacrifice for? Because if you're not willing to sacrifice for it, then somebody's going to have to use punishment or reward systems to get you to do it.
Yeah.
And if you sit with yourself and ponder that over time, I think that stuff starts to emerge. But you have to be honest with yourself about that. So what are you willing to sacrifice for? It's going to cost you something. If you think that you're going to, New Year's resolutions are coming, everyone's going to go to the gym and all the gym memberships are going to spike. And then in February, they're going to tank.
They will.
Because
they will do that.
Every year. And I think it's built into the gym membership model. Like, okay, January will be good.
Yeah.
But the problem is people have the idea of fitness, but then when they have the experience of what it takes to get there, like, I'm not willing to sacrifice for that.
Exactly.
Right. So I think that's one of the ways to think about this. The other way is I would start small. Don't overdo it, but begin to find your voice as you're setting goals and learn the difference between your voice and others' voices. And when you learn how to do that, you can, that's my parents talking. Oh, that's my boss talking. And it doesn't make it wrong or bad. It's just a different voice.
Yeah.
What is your voice?
Yeah. One of the things that we do when we're meeting with clients at different times throughout our processes, we'll get the client into a self-centering place. And part of that process is we say, hey, let's just take a moment and let's go ahead and, ask our spouse, the voice of our spouse, to leave the room for a moment. Did your kids follow you in here? Maybe they're not literally here, but you're carrying that. Let's just move them out, put them in the waiting room.
Yep.
Even your boss.
Yep.
It's like, oh, all these taboos. No, let's just ask your boss. Go get a cup of coffee. even God, right?
Yeah.
We'll do this because we're trying to get them to go learn how to listen to your voice, and it's a thing that some of us, we've never felt the permission to do it, and for others we've been afraid to go down. We're not familiar with it. Maybe we haven't been asked not to do. We've just been afraid to go there because we don't know what's lurking in that place. But typically, it's going to feel a bit, mysterious, and maybe even, trigger a little bit of fear in you because you're starting to come out with things that you can be judged by. These are things that, I do want to do these, but I've never said it before in public.
Right.
What are
They're
people
often
gonna
secrets.
think? Yeah, exactly.
I think of it as there are certain things that I would rather have the idea of, that knowing that if the circumstances are ever right, I'll get to do this thing I want, than to actually risk doing it and failing at it, because then I feel like, well, then I can't have it.
Yeah.
And that's not how it works.
Yeah.
So we hold these secrets inside of us, and it can even be revelatory to ourselves that we want something. When we want something like that, we introduce ourselves to the possibility of failure, and failure hurts, and there's no way to make it not hurt.
Right.
Are you resilient enough to fail, learn, and then go at it again? That's the question.
Yeah.
There's also a reality to this, that it sometimes takes decades to get a meaningful, deep answer to this question. Like if the listener's in their mid-20s, we'll say, and they're really convinced that they're passionate about something, they're going to go after it. It's like, well, maybe, but have you ever done it before? And they're like, no. And it's like, okay, let's go do that thing and find out if we're passionate through the doing.
Right.
It's a great idea. I'm on board, but let's engage it and go try this thing and not be afraid to let it go or fail at it. That's all right, because what we're going to do is try on numerous things through that season. And then we're in all of that work, there's this collective understanding of, it's over there.
Yeah.
There's usually a through line to that experience when you look at it retroactively. But clarity is only retroactive.
Right. Yeah.
And so you have to be willing to say, I want this, and then go after it and go, that wasn't quite it.
Yeah.
And that can be hard.
So as we wrap here, one of the things we might be saying is, as we close out 2023, we're looking into 2024, maybe take the courage to level up your goal setting. Yeah. We know you're going to have kind of a revision of 2023 goals that carry over into 2024. They're just changing them a little bit here and there. Maybe they're a little bigger, and that's all good, normal. But think about adding an intrinsic goal into the mix if you're not familiar with doing that. And then see, as you practice, see maybe how more dimensional or how more fulfilling your 2024 may be over 2023.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I would add to that. I love that idea. And I would add to it that if you're the kind of person who goes, I don't do goals, right? I don't like the pressure that it creates. I would suggest to you that you've probably primarily been experiencing it through an external motivated set.
Right.
And okay, don't do those goals. That's fine. But when we're using the word goal, we're connecting to something you probably really want to do,
right,
which is do something that matters to you. Do things that have meaning and purpose in them. And articulating goals around that is what we're talking about. And that's the intrinsic.
Mm-hmm.
And so maybe re-engage goals, but do it very differently in your own voice.
Yeah.
And a lot of people are stepping away. They've given up on goals. And I would suggest that if you're behaving in the world, you're actually going after a goal, right? All behavior is motivated. And so you probably do have goals. But doing the work of getting those articulated and then elevating them, like you're saying,
right,
and finding your yes, it just pays dividends in wonderful ways.
It does.
It is hard. It's just worth it.